A shocking movie death can take a film to the next level of both thrills and emotion, ensuring that audiences never forget what they've just seen. But sometimes there's the prevailing feeling that a filmmaker is deliberately toying with the audience by serving up an unpredictable death that, for better or worse, is mostly intended to leave viewers baffled and confused. In some cases, it was clearly the right call. Cleverly subverting expectations with a surprise death can prove genuinely refreshing, but in other instances, it simply felt like a shock for shock's own sake, rather than because it made dramatic sense. So, with that in mind, I'm Ellie with Whatculture, here with 10 movie deaths that totally trolled audiences. Number 10. Cyclops, X-Men The Last Stand. X-Men The Last Stand is jam-packed with questionable creative decisions. Most of all, the totally anticlimactic out-of-nowhere death of fan-favourite mutant Cyclops just 25 minutes into the movie. After Cyclops drives out to Alkali Lake, Jean Grey appears before him in her resurrected Phoenix form, and as the two passionately kiss, she uses her powers to kill him off-screen, leaving behind only his dope sunglasses. Given that Cyclops is one of the most iconic X-Men characters from the comics and was a major fixture in the first two films, taking him out like he was some dime store goon felt like a major insult to fans. Now, legend says that Cyclops went out like a chump because James Marsden signed on for a major role in Superman Returns, and Fox either couldn't or wouldn't rejig the Last Stand schedule to accommodate him. Number 9. Casey Becker, Scream. Now here's a troll death that audiences were absolutely happy to be a part of, because it was the right kind of surprise and got the movie off to an unpredictable start. It goes without saying that Drew Barrymore was by far the most famous face starring in Wes Craven's Scream, and duly, the marketing focused extensively on her facing off against the film's Ghostface killer. But as it turned out, Barrymore's protagonist, Casey Becker, barely makes it past the 10-minute mark, dying in the film's brilliant opening scene, despite audiences likely assuming that she was safe for the entirety of the tense sequence. When the prologue concluded with Casey gutted and hanging from a tree, audiences' jaws were left on the floor, totally unsure how the rest of the movie would pan out. As a feat of subverting expectations, it really was quite brilliant. Number 8. Hoban Washburn, Serenity. If you ever get emotionally attached to one of Joss Whedon's characters, you need to ready yourself for the possibility that they're going to die a horrible death in the near future. After a passionate fan campaign led to cult sci-fi TV show Firefly receiving a movie adaptation, the filmmakers made the interesting decision to brutally murder the most likable character in the film's third act. That's the fate that depressingly befalls Pilot Wash in Serenity's climax, where after successfully navigating the ship Serenity through a battle between the Reavers and the Alliance, he's randomly impaled by a massive Reaver harpoon totally out of nowhere. Because the rest of the crew are also in mortal danger, there's no time for sentimental farewells nor any affecting last words. Wash just dies, and the rest of the crew then have to battle their way to safety before they can even process what happened. Number 7. Elizabeth Shaw, Alien Covenant. Though the deaths of Newt and Hicks will forever piss off Alien fans more than anything else, at least their stories seemed fairly well concluded at the end of Aliens, and fans are free to simply keep them alive in their own head canon. The same can't really be said, sadly, of Elizabeth Shaw, one of Prometheus's few likeable characters and who at the end of the movie was seen seeking out the engineer's homeworld in the pursuit of answers about humanity's existence. Despite Prometheus's flaws, fans were excited to see a sequel where Shaw explored the exotic engineer planet, only for Scott to change on a dime and decide that the Prometheus sequel needed more xenomorphs and, less Shaw. Shaw's involvement in Alien Covenant was kept hugely ambiguous leading up to the film's release, and ultimately only her voice was actually heard in the final movie, as well as appearing briefly in a short film released online before Covenant hit cinemas. Yet the biggest crime wasn't so much Shaw's absence, but the fact that Covenant's third act reveals the character to have died at the hands of malevolent android David as one of his grotesque experiments. We see Shaw's mutilated corpse in order to give fans some semblance of closure, but given that they actually liked Shaw and her involvement in Covenant seemed like a logical follow-up to Prometheus, it was absolutely baffling that she got a totally infuriating off-screen death. Number 6. Moss, No Country for Old Men. The Coen brothers' Best Picture winning masterpiece is a movie fully concerned with defying expectations and denying the audience the typical genre thrills they're hardwired to anticipate. The film is of course centered around Josh Brolin's excellently portrayed bounty hunter Moss, who accidentally stumbles upon $2 million in the wake of a drug deal gone wrong, which puts him on the radar of Terminator-like assassin Anton Chigurh, who has been tasked with recovering the cash. Conventional movie tropes suggest that the film is heading towards a bloody third-act showdown between the two men, but the Coens, being the Coens, they pull the rug out when audiences least expect it. Moss ends up being killed by a random group of Mexicans who have been tailing him, and not only does this occur 20 minutes before the end of the movie, it happens off-screen and we only get to see Sheriff Ed Tom Bell discover Moss's corpse. Many viewers found Moss's death deeply unsatisfying, especially as Chigurh ends up getting away with the money and Bell is patently unable to try and stop him. But given how much violence the Coens mete out prior, shying away from Moss's death is significant, as though they consider it enough of a foretold consequence of his actions that it doesn't even need to be shown. Number 5. David Dunn, Glass. Though the big twist in M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense pretty much defines a troll death, let's look at a more recent example in the director's filmography, albeit another one that involves Bruce Willis. Shyamalan's hugely anticipated superhero movie Glass remains a deeply disappointing film, because even if you were with it until deep into the third act, Shyamalan royally screwed the pooch when it came to the fate of his central hero David Dunn, aka the Overseer. After pleasantly subverting expectations by cancelling Mr. Glass's hinted at final showdown at a lavish skyscraper, the climactic battle between Dunn and the Horde instead takes place in an unremarkable parking lot. But Shyamalan comes unstuck when he makes the extremely ill-advised call to not only have all three central superpowered characters die at the end, but have Dunn be drowned in a puddle of water by an anonymous goon. Now, Shyamalan clearly knew what he was doing here. He wanted to make a superhero movie that defied sentimental expectations and felt more grounded. But there's just no universe where mass audiences would go home happy after the franchise hero dies in such totally banal fashion. It was a brave choice on the director's part, but ultimately a foolish one, given what paying customers actually wanted to see. Number 4. Captain James T. Kirk, Star Trek Generations. There's no denying the iconic appeal of William Shatner's Captain James T. Kirk, and fans were obviously enticed by Star Trek Generations promising a thrilling crossover between the original series and the next generation. But the allure of seeing Kirk hang out with Captain Jean-Luc Picard was thoroughly undermined by the film's utterly limp, low-effort attempt to pass the torch between the two, by killing the former off in the most bizarre and unintentionally hilarious manner possible. Kirk kicked the bucket by falling to his death from a rickety metal walkway. That anyone thought that this was in any way a fitting death for such a beloved character is just ludicrous, and tarnished a film that was already struggling to live up to its admittedly terrific premise. Malcolm McDowell probably put it best, saying, "They had this icon of American television, why the hell didn't they give him a spectacular death? Why did they give him such a really paltry death?" For more hot takes on Star Trek content, make sure you head over to our sister channel Whatculture. Number 3. Paul Conroy, Buried. This low-budget suspense thriller stars Ryan Reynolds as Paul Conroy, an American contractor buried alive in Iraq with no apparent means of escape. Buried is a deliciously intense, superbly directed one-man show which takes place entirely inside a coffin, serving as an impeccable showcase for Reynolds' acting chops in the process. And it's fair to say that Reynolds' involvement prompted most audiences to assume that at the end of the film's palm-sweating rollercoaster ride, he'd be rescued. But to the surprise of just about everybody, that isn't in fact the case. Buried does a fantastic job turning the screws tight in its third act, with hostage negotiator Dan Brenner desperately racing against time to save Conroy, with Brenner telling Conroy that he saved a man, Mark White, from a similar situation several weeks prior. But in the film's final moments, Brenner and his team arrive at Conroy's apparent location, only to open the coffin and find that they've been led to the grave of Mark White. Not only did Brenner lie about rescuing him, but there's now no chance of Conroy being saved. Sand then fills Conroy's coffin as Brenner apologizes to him, and the movie ends, and that's all she wrote. Number 2. Supreme Leader Snoke, Star Wars The Last Jedi. Star Wars: The Last Jedi isn't the first time the franchise introduced a badass villain in one movie only to unceremoniously kill them off in the next one. Boba Fett, anyone? But it's certainly the instance that most aggressively whipped fans into an angry frenzy. After The Force Awakens revealed Supreme Leader Snoke to audiences, the implication seemed pretty clear that he'd be the Thanos-esque overarching villain of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Nobody could have possibly expected then that the character would end up sliced in half by a lightsaber at the hands of Kylo Ren 45 minutes before the end of The Last Jedi, no less. Given that The Last Jedi seemed to be setting the stage for a final showdown between Snoke and Rey in Episode 9, this totally threw fans for a loop. Many were simply unable to accept that their own ideas and theories had not come to fruition, most of all that Snoke wasn't revealed to be Star Wars legend Darth Plagueis. But whether you dug the twist as a neat upending of expectations or hated it for curtailing an awesome villain's potential, it was most certainly an epic troll on the part of writer-director Rian Johnson. Number 1. Ben, Night of the Living Dead. George A. Romero's seminal zombie film is a true original and cemented not only the audience thirst for tales of the undead, but also Romero's penchant for wrapping cutting social commentary around heightened genre films. Night of the Living Dead is full of harrowing and iconic moments, but none more so than the shocking climactic death of sole survivor Ben. The morning after the zombie apocalypse, a posse of armed rednecks arrives at the farmhouse to clean up the remaining zombies, and upon seeing Ben peek his head out the window, one of the gang immediately opens fire, shooting him dead. For starters, Ben's death confirms the movie's prevailing social commentary about miscommunication among humans. But more tellingly, it's practically impossible not to view it as a civil rights allegory, what with the black man being mistaken for a ghoul by the white armed Southerners. Given that Ben seemed primed to survive, his last-minute death couldn't be much more of a troll, especially considering the context within which the film was released.